Welcome back, Bird Gang fans, to the Red Phantom podcast where we'll be talking everything involving the Arizona Cardinals. This episode will focus on my reaction and thoughts about the game against the Detroit Lions, as well as the upcoming game against the Washington Commanders. So let's jump straight into our thoughts about last week's game. Starting off in the first half, things look like it carried over from the game against the Rams. Starting in the first quarter, the Lions went down and scored a touchdown on a 1-yard rush by David Montgomery, and the Cardinals answered back quickly by scoring a touchdown of their own on a 10-yard pass to Marvin Harrison Jr., making his third touchdown of his career. On the next drive, the Lions would go up 13-7 on a 5-yard touchdown pass to Amon-Ra St. Brown, with Jake Bates missing the extra point. The next couple of drives were punts by both teams until we get to the Lions' final drive of the first half. This drive had a lot of controversy behind it, as many of us now know the infamous 2-minute warning pick six that Mack Wilson would have had if the refs didn't blow the play dead. This would have given the Cardinals a 13-14 lead before half. As a result of the controversial play, the Lions would end up having a hook and ladder play from Amon-Ra St. Brown to Jahmyr Gibbs that would extend the Lions' lead 20-7. In response to this, the Cardinals went down the field and kicked a field goal of their own to end the half 20-10. And they would end up getting the ball after halftime after deferring the kick to open the game. Now, the 2-minute warning pick six was being blown up all over social media after the play had happened. A lot of people were saying the Cardinals got robbed. There was a lot of freeze frames going along. People were saying that the refs made the right call, blowing the play dead, and the players just didn't hear it. As a Cardinal fan, I personally think that we were robbed. I think a lot of us would agree with that play too. Lion fans, on the other hand, probably are going to say, nope, it was a clean play. The refs blew the play dead. It's whatever. Move on from the play. I personally think that play killed all the momentum for the Cardinals. I mean, you make a huge play like that, you go extend the lead, Mack Wilson having the season of his career, after that pick six, all momentum goes away because now you're thinking, wow, we really just got screwed over on this play, and now we have to stop him for another play, and then the whole thing happens with Amon-Ra St. Brown and Jahmyr Gibbs scoring that touchdown. And it's really unfortunate how everything went down on that specific play. And I will always say that that will be a pick six that the refs unfortunately blew dead, even though it should have continued. Because we've seen it countless times where people will snap the ball last second and they go on and do something crazy. And I've never once ever seen a play get blown dead as the play is going on, which makes no sense. And of course, the Cardinals do it when they score the pick six and make this huge play, and the refs are like, oh no, it's a dead play, we're not going to count it. And now you got an entire stadium of Cardinal fans upset because of what just happened live on the field. And not only that, but you have a lot of these news networks covering the situation and saying, man, did the Cardinals really get screwed over by the refs, which would be an unfortunate circumstance because I can't even think of the last time the Cardinals got screwed over by the refs. I mean, it happens to teams all the time, but this was just really, really bad by the NFL officiating crew. Now, enough of that rant. We go into the second half. The Cardinals looked like they were going to play just as well as they did in the first half. They drove downfield and got close to the red zone before Kyler Murray decided to throw his first interception of his season that was intended for Marvin Harrison Jr. in the end zone. The Lions, on their next drive after the interception, ended up punting the ball back to the Cardinals, and the Cardinals wouldn't do much and punt the ball back to the Lions. 2 plays later, Dennis Gardeck would become the first Cardinal player to record an interception this season, picking off Jared Goff for 10 yards. The Cardinals would then go for on 4th down and would not convert, with Kyler Murray sliding just a little bit before the first down marker. The Lions would get the ball back, but they too would also turn over the ball after Dante Still stopped David Montgomery on 4th and 1. The Cardinals in turn would not be able to do anything and punt the ball back to the Lions, and the Lions would then chew up some clock, but then punt the ball back to the Cardinals. In turn, the Cardinals would do everything and turn the ball over again on a second time on 4th down, and the Lions would get the ball back in Cardinals territory. Fortunately, the Cardinals defense was able to step up this half and was able to stop the Lions from getting any yards and would punt the ball to the Cardinals yet again. The Cardinals wouldn't be able to do much again and would punt the ball back to the Lions. The Lions would then try to put the game away, but our defense stepped up, stopped the Lions from getting into field goal range, and resulted in them punting the ball back to the Cardinals. Eventually, a little too late, the Cardinals would get something going and move the ball down the field into field goal range after some big plays, but unfortunately would lose starting tight end Trey McBride to a concussion by Brian Branch. As a result, the Cardinals would end up going downfield and kicking a field goal, making it a 20-13 game. And the Cardinals would then try to make one last stand against the Lions offense, and unfortunately would not be able to stop Jared Goff as he took off for 8 yards to pick up the final first down of the game for the Lions to win 20-13. Now let's jump straight into the stats with the Arizona Cardinals. Kyler Murray went 21 for 34 with 207 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception, along with 5 carries for 45 rushing yards. James Conner went 9 carries for 17 yards and a catch for 8 yards. Marvin Harrison Jr. went 5 catches on 11 targets for 64 yards. Michael Wilson had 8 catches on 9 targets for 64 yards. Dante Stills had 5 tackles, 1 sack, and 1 tackle for loss. Kaiser White had 11 tackles, and Dennis Gardeck had 4 tackles, 1 tackle for loss, and an interception. Up next, we have the Lions. Jared Goff went 18 for 23 on 199 yards, 2 touchdowns with an interception, and David Montgomery went 23 carries for 105 yards with a rushing touchdown, along with 3 catches for 17 yards. Jahmyr Gibbs went 16 carries for 83 yards and 0 catches for 20 receiving yards and 1 touchdown at the hook and ladder. Amon-Ra St. Brown had 7 catches on 8 targets for 75 yards and a touchdown. Aiden Hutchinson had 6 tackles and surprisingly 1 sack with 1 tackle for loss. Brian Branch had 9 tackles with a tackle for loss, and Kirby Joseph had 3 tackles with an interception. Now, looking at the stats, you would think the Cardinals would have a better game, passing the ball more than Jared Goff. Rushing was a different story. I mean, we're going against the number 1 rushing defense in the league, so it's not much of a shock that, there was only 77 yards of rushing for the whole Cardinals team, with a lot of it coming from Kyler Murray just scrambling the ball. But this Cardinals team is just very fluctuated on the situation. I think a lot of the Cardinals offense revolves around James Conner and Kyler Murray and rushing the ball. I mean, that's what was doing so well against the Rams 2 weeks ago, and what was doing well against the Buffalo Bills until the Bills figured out how to stop the run game. And, the Cardinals definitely do know how to run the ball, and I'm not going to say, it's terrible that we had 77 rushing yards, because it is, but, it shouldn't alarm too many people just because, they are the number 1 defense in the league, like I said earlier. And, keeping a touchdown game between, a team that went to the NFC Championship last year, I mean, that's a big deal. I mean, like I said, when we played the Bills, it was a huge deal that we kept it a 6-point game between the Bills. It's just unfortunate because, both of those games were games that we definitely could have won had we just performed a little bit better. I mean, our defense the first half looked really, really bad. And if it wasn't for the blown 2-minute warning pick 6, I think it would have been a completely different outcome. And I think after that 2-minute pick 6 warning, I think the Cardinals defense said, hey, we're not going to let them score another drive after this. And that's exactly what they did. The entire second half, the Lions never scored a single point. They were in Cardinal territory, but they never scored a single point. I think the closest they got was the Cardinals' 48-yard line or 45-yard, something around there. And that was because the Cardinals turned the ball over at that point of the field. But, I mean, props to the Cardinals defense. They're playing better than a lot of people expected the Cardinals defense to play. And we're without B.J. Ojulari. We're without Darius Robinson until 2 weeks later. And, we just lost Justin Jones. And Dante Stills is playing at a really high level and should have been starting from week 1. But, Mac Wilson coming in and Kaiser White playing together with them. I mean, the linebacker duo is just completely insane. I mean, they are making plays left and right. You add on Budda Baker making plays. You add on Jalen Thompson making plays. I mean, our defense is definitely playing better than mediocre. I think they're playing decent, which, I mean, of course isn't great, but it's definitely enough to have the Cardinals win some games here and there. And I mean, watching the Lions game, I mean, we definitely could have beat the Lions. And I think, something wasn't clicking with the Cardinals. It might have been the rushing game. I mean, we definitely saw how that whole situation went. But I think Kyler Murray was trying to force the ball a little too much to Marvin Harrison Jr. Now, I'm not going to say it's a bad thing that they got Marvin Harrison Jr. with 11 targets. I mean, that's great. They're involving him more in the pass game. They're giving him more, targets, more chances to catch the ball. But I think Kyler Murray gets too reliant on seeing Marvin Harrison Jr. I mean, Michael Wilson went 8 for 9 on catches with 64 yards, just as many as Marvin Harrison Jr. had yardage-wise. I mean, Michael Wilson is not a bad receiver. I think, honestly, we should be throwing the ball more to him, too, to get him some one-on-one coverage, because he definitely is one of those bigger receivers that can come down with 50-50 balls. And we saw it this week, and we saw it last week. And, Michael Wilson, with Marvin Harrison Jr. having a bunch of double teams, leaves Michael Wilson to have more of those one-on-one targets, and he can absolutely win some of those targets like we saw against the Lions. And I'm not saying, Marvin Harrison Jr. shouldn't be getting 11 targets, because I think it's great that he's getting all the looks at, but like Malik Neighbors is getting 14 targets a game, and that's because he's like the only receiver on the Giants. And I mean, Marvin Harrison Jr. is definitely up there with Malik Neighbors. I think he's better than Malik Neighbors, but you shouldn't be forcing him the ball like Daniel Jones does with Malik Neighbors. I think if Marvin Harrison Jr. is open, get it to him. I mean, we saw how great of a playmaker he is. He scored 3 touchdowns in the last 2 weeks, and he's had almost 200 yards in the last 2 weeks. I mean, that's unreal. I mean, Marvin Harrison Jr. is the number 4 draft pick, and he shows why, because he's getting all these double looks. And that opens up more targets to Michael Wilson. It opens up more targets to Trey McBride. It opens up more targets to Greg Dortch, and even more targets to James Conner or Trey Benson out of the backfield. I mean, we want to have that number 1 receiver that Marvin Harrison Jr. is. But Kyler Murray should not be forcing the ball unless he absolutely has to. And I think one perfect ideal moment for that would have been in week 1 against the Buffalo Bills on 4th and whatever to win the game. Because that's absolutely a moment you need your big, tall receiver to come down and make a 50-50 catch like that. And I know Marvin Harrison Jr. is still progressing and developing in the league, and great for him because he's going to be an even greater receiver for the Cardinals, but we need to also get other Cardinal receivers more involved with the game. And I think after this performance with Michael Wilson, I think they're going to start looking more at him during the Commanders because, the Commanders' defense isn't very great. They don't have any pass rushers. Their defensive line is mediocre minus the 2 defensive tackles that they have. Their secondary is nowhere near great. And then the whole team is just aging. And I think the team next week is going to rely a lot on doubling Marvin Harrison Jr. now that Trey McBride is out with the concussion. And I think there's going to be more one-on-one targets for Greg Dortch, Michael Wilson, Elijah Higgins, maybe Trip Ryman. And, seeing that kind of production that the Cardinals have, they should be able to win against the Commanders. And with how the defense played this last week against the Lions, I mean, if they play even 50% of what they played last week, I still think they're going to win the game against the Commanders. Granted, Jane Jones has had his career game against the Bengals where he, ran for 2 touchdowns, threw for 2 touchdowns, 0 turnovers on the season. And, he looks like a real quarterback. And I think a lot of it relies on Cliff Kingsbury's play calling. Because we all know how Cliff is in the first half. He's always really great in the first half, and he always falls apart in the second half. But I really do think that Jaden Daniels is going to be a quarterback that we have to watch after against the Commanders. And, we have Dante Stills, who made a huge present this week after Justin Jones went out. We had Dennis Gardeck, who made a pretty big play here and there for the Lions. He had a couple of sacks against the Rams last week or 2 weeks ago. And, Zaven Collins is becoming more of a better pass rusher, but he's one of the best edge rushers for the run defense. I mean, PPF graded him as the number 1 edge rush running defender with, I think, like an 81 point something. And then, you add on Mac Wilson, you add on Kaiser White, you add on, Xavier Thomas. And just looking at that front 7, I mean, it's not pretty, but it'll get the job done. And I mean, when Darius Robinson comes back, it's going to be an even better defensive line to watch going back and forth with the game. And, I know, like, watching the Cardinals this week, it was really disappointing just seeing how the offense was playing, but you have to give props to Kyler Murray. I mean, he only got sacked once with a third-string right tackle against Aiden Hutchinson. I mean, to even think that Aiden Hutchinson only had one sack compared to last week where he had 4.5, I mean, that's unreal numbers that the Cardinals were able to work around Aiden Hutchinson and only hold him to one sack. Granted, he still had 6 tackles throughout the whole game, making plays on the run, on the pass. I mean, Aiden Hutchinson is going to be Defensive Player of the Year one day, but just watching how the team played, I do think the Cardinals have the potential to win the division this year with how many injuries teams have had. And, Seattle's over here talking about winning the division, but they haven't played a real team. And I think this week will show that the Cardinals are not a team to mess around with when Seattle gets blown out by the Lions, especially with how poor their defensive line is now with all the injuries that they have. And, teams are going to have bad offensive games. Teams are going to have bad defensive games. I think last week against the Lions was going to be the worst offensive game that we have on the season. I could be wrong, but I do think the game against the Lions is going to be the worst offensive game that we had this season. Just because we really couldn't establish anything. We couldn't establish a run game. We couldn't establish a passing game. We couldn't really do anything because there was just too much going on. And I think, Drew Petzing's offensive scheme revolves around the run game. And I mean, that's what it revolves around when he was with the Browns. It revolved around Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt doing a 1-2 punch kind of thing. And now we have James Conner. He's trying to readjust. Okay, let's add Marvin Harrison Jr. Let's add Michael Wilson. Let's add Greg Dortch. Let's add Trey McBride. Let's add all these weapons that we have that the Browns didn't have back then and add them to our team. And let's try to work where we can run the ball and run some play actions and have some one-on-one coverages with Marvin Harrison Jr. or any of the other big receivers that we have on the team. And, this season is all about understanding how the offense works. And, our team is young. Our team is a little inexperienced. But, I think they're going to get something going as the season progresses. And we've seen that, years and years with other teams. We saw it last year with the Texans where, they started off really slow, ended up going and winning the division against the Jaguars and, going on to a next week division against the Ravens in the divisional round for the AFC spot. And, the Cardinals might have something like that where they have Kyler Murray, Marvin Harrison Jr., who's rising up in the league, Trey McBride, who's going to be one of the top tight ends in the league, and, building around James Conner, who's going to be hopefully back next season with how he's producing. But just watching that team understand how the offense works and building more chemistry as the season continues. I mean, we're going to see the Cardinals play to a contender level later in the season. I really do think, after watching the team play, that there are teams that we play in the season who I do think we will absolutely win. And one of those games is the Washington Commanders. There's no reason we should lose to the Washington Commanders next week. And, we'll talk about that with, Jayden Jones, like I had mentioned. We'll talk about that with Zach Ertz, Terry McLaurin, and just all that defensive stuff with the Washington Commanders. So jumping into the lookout for this upcoming game this Sunday, the Cardinals are going to be without tight end Trey McBride and defensive tackle Kyrus Tonga, with Isaiah Adams and Kelvin Beachum questionable for this week, while the Commanders are going to be without wide receiver Jamison Crowder, defensive end Clennon Farrell, and running back Austin Eckler. This is an absolute must-win game for the Arizona Cardinals. There's no sugarcoating this game. There's a lot of history in this game, like I mentioned earlier, with Cliff now being the offensive coordinator for the Commanders. For the new fans who don't know, Cliff was the Cardinals head coach for 4 years, and in those 4 years, he finished with a record of 28, 38, and 1. He looked to be a promising head coach, bringing the team its first playoff appearance in 6 years, but unfortunately would have mid-season collapses going 10 and 28 after the midway point of the season during his 4-year tenure. On top of Cliff Kingsbury returning to Arizona, Zach Ertz will also be making his return to Arizona after being cut from the team last year in favor of Trey McBride, and has the second most receiving yards on the team behind Terry McLaurin, as well as only being 9 yards ahead of Austin Eckler. The biggest problem on the team for the Cardinals is Jaden Daniels, a very mobile quarterback, and we saw what Josh Allen did to the Cardinals in Week 1 with his mobility, so pressuring a young quarterback and containing him in the pocket is an absolute must for the Cardinals team to get him to turn over the ball. On top of that, the run game is going to be a big part of the Commanders' offense. Brian Robinson has been a very solid running back for the Commanders, so stopping him is also going to be a big part of this Cardinals defensive scheme this week. Now, I will say Daniels has done a great job throwing the ball, having an 80% completion percentage and no turnovers like I mentioned earlier. His main targets are going to be McLaurin and Ertz, and now that Eckler's out, Robinson will have to work on his pass-catching game to help sell the pass plays. The Cardinals are going to keep Daniels from passing the ball very much. Chances are Ertz will be matched up against Kaiser White, and McLaurin will be covered by Sean Murphy Button majority of the game, with extra help over top. Noah Brown is also making a name for the Commanders' wide receiver room with 6 catches for 85 yards, as well as Luke McCaffrey, the rookie receiver, with 6 catches for 62 yards. Nothing too spectacular there, so I think they're going to focus a lot on the receiving two guys of Zach Ertz and Terry McLaurin. Now, for the Cardinals' offense, should be having a field day against this Commanders' defense. No Clelin Ferrell takes away their biggest edge threat on the team, as well as the secondary not being that great. We should see more targets, of course, to Marvin Harrison Jr. and Michael Wilson. More outside run will be established with the Cardinals, with the Commanders having guys like Jonathan Allen and Daron Payne in the middle. But Bobby Wagner is really the only guy in that defense that scares me, and he has regressed a lot since he's been with the Seattle Seahawks. So this Cardinals offense should click very well against this Commander defense. Now, like I mentioned earlier, Murray's going to be without Trey McBride, but Elijah Higgins should be able to slide into that perfectly for this game in McBride's absence. Now, this game will either be a blowout or a close game depending on how the Cardinals play against Jaden Daniels. Personally, I believe this game will be anywhere from a 10 to 14 point game. The Cardinals really have a great offense, and like I said earlier, if the Cardinals defense can play even 50% of what they did last week in the Lions' second half, this Commanders team will struggle to get anything going against the Cardinals. Offensively, I expect MHJ and James Conner to have a really big game this week, with Michael Wilson making some great plays this week. But I think the final score of this game is going to be a high-scoring game, so I firmly believe the Cardinals will win 20-35. Now, this will conclude this week's episode. I'll see you guys next week after the Cardinals and Commanders game happens, and we'll talk more in depth behind the scenes of what goes on in that game, as well as our upcoming game against the San Francisco 49ers. We might have Darius Robinson back, so it's a lot of great news. And on top of that, Zay Jones is coming back in 2 weeks, so he's already practicing with the team, so there's already going to be great things coming from the Cardinals. But as always, you can follow my Instagram, my Twitter, my TikTok. I'll be everywhere posting updates here and there. And this is from the Red Phantom signing out till next week.